He's the horror hunter from down under. He will go in search every week of the best and worst in horror movies throughout the month of October. His mission? Don't come back until he's found some of the best and worst putrid piles of horror goodness you could ever imagine. I promised you something special last time, and here it is. We're going to talk about the Halloween franchise. This is my favorite horror franchise of all time. Be it slasher or otherwise, I love the Halloween franchise. Michael Myers is my favorite slasher, so let's get into it today. I'm your host, the Horror Hunter, and the first thing you should know about the original Halloween is this franchise technically has 2 trilogies in it. Fans have dubbed them the Strode Trilogy, which is Halloween, Halloween 2, and Halloween H2O, and the Thorn Trilogy, Halloween 4, Halloween 5, Halloween 6. Now you're probably wondering, what about Halloween 3 and Halloween Resurrection and those 2 god-awful Rob Zombie movies? We'll talk about them as well, but I'm going to focus on the franchise and how these 3 movies in these 2 trilogies connect to each other. Then we'll talk about the rest of the franchise. So, to begin, let's start with the original, John Carpenter's Halloween. Now, Halloween's interesting for multiple reasons, one of which is Moustapha Akkad, who, if you're a long-time fan of the Halloween franchise, you'll know he's basically the Halloween grandfather. He's the one that financed that first picture so long ago, and he and his son, Malik Akkad, have been responsible for producing all of the Halloween movies in the franchise thus far. Now, the original film is interesting because it was originally going to just be called The Babysitter Murders. I don't know about you, but I think Halloween is much better. I believe it was producer Erwin Yablans who said something to the effect of, let's set the whole thing on Halloween, thus making it Halloween instead of The Babysitter Murders. Now, John Carpenter's influence here is so notable because he was the one that had the idea of putting the camera as the POV for the killer, Michael Myers, aka The Shape. In the early scripts, Michael Myers was primarily just called The Shape. And I always found that really cool because, yeah, that's exactly what he is. He's not really got any distinguishing features because of that white blank slate of a mask, right? So, let's talk about why this movie's so effective and why it's lasted as long as it has, right? Now, the first thing you've got to talk about is the amazing cast, because you've got Donald Pleasence and you've got PJ Soles, and of course you've got Laurie Strode herself, Jamie Lee Curtis. Now, I love these 3 actors. I think they're great. I think of the 70s, I think of people like PJ Soles, I think of James Bond, I think of Halloween when I think of Donald Pleasence, and of course Jamie Lee Curtis, well, she became something of a commodity of herself. You know, daughter of Hollywood royalty and everything, right? So, that's the thing. It's got a great cast. Then you've got this brilliant mastermind, John Carpenter, behind the camera, and he wrote the script along with partner Deborah Hill. Now, the 2 of them wrote the second Halloween as well, I believe. I know Deborah Hill was at least on the production end of the second Halloween. But the first several Halloween movies were sort of John Carpenter's little producing projects. You know, Steven Spielberg always puts his name on movies as, you know, Steven Spielberg presents Back to the Future, for example. Well, that's kind of what Carpenter did with the second and third installments. Well, here, he wrote and directed the thing as well as producing it. And his influence is just so notable. I mean, he also wrote the score for these first 3 pictures, and he is so bloody brilliant when it comes to his music. I absolutely love the themes that he's worked on, but particularly the Halloween theme. It's just the perfect. It's the Halloween theme. I would liken to the theme from Jaws, in that every time you hear that theme, you know Michael is around somewhere. It's kind of like the shark in Jaws, where you know he's circling about somewhere. In this case, it's Michael Myers and his knife, right? Now, interesting thing about this movie. It was, at one point in time, the most successful independent film ever made. And that's incredibly impressive, particularly for the time. So, the thing that's interesting about Halloween to me is that it was actually a fairly short movie. So short, in fact, that they actually had to extend it for when it debuted on NBC in the early 80s. So, what did they do? Well, they got the actors back together, and they shot 15 more minutes of footage exclusively for the TV version. Now, longtime fans of the series, there are two names for this. There's the TV cut, and there's the extended cut. Not really much of a difference, but they're the same exact thing. Now, what's interesting about the TV cut as opposed to the theatrical cut is, the theatrical cut was supposed to be something of an homage to Psycho, the Alfred Hitchcock film. Same can be said for the TV cut, but neither cut really has a lot of, nudity or language really to write home about. It was really almost tame by comparison to most standards of horror film back then. That's why it's an interesting piece to this day, is because it gets most of its work done based on sheer suspense rather than gore and nudity. Now, the same can't be said for the rest of the franchise, but more on that when we get to them. But this first film, when they added the extended cut for television, there was one thing in particular that came out of that extended cut that makes it really worth it. You know what that is? We learned what Michael's middle name is. There's a court scene where they're talking to Dr. Loomis about why they no longer think Michael Myers should be locked up in Spitz-Grove Sanitarium. And in that court scene, the judge refers to Michael as Michael Aldrich Myers. So, if you ever wanted to know what Michael Myers' middle name is, now you know. So, that's been our look at the first Halloween movie. Now, one more thing that just occurred to me that I think is notable about this first Halloween movie. Primarily, while there were multiple actors who played the shape, Michael Myers, in that first movie, primarily the man in the suit was Nicholas Castle, or Nick Castle, the man responsible for directing The Last Starfighter. Now, I've always thought that was kind of interesting, because The Last Starfighter is more of a family film, and Halloween you probably couldn't say it is. But anyway, one more thing of note I thought you might find interesting. Now, this has been our first look at the first installment in the Halloween franchise. Join us next time when we talk about Halloween 2 as part of the Strode Trilogy. Now, I've been your host, the Horror Hunter. Join us next time on 31 Days of Horror. Aaron Talks will be back next month, and don't forget to click that like icon, that bell icon, so you can be notified every time 31 Days of Horror has a new video uploaded. And I'll see you guys later.